Hello everyone, welcome back to our Spring Boot series. Today I'll be talking about conditional beans. You will see that it's a very powerful mechanism that Spring Boot provides you that allows you to configure, let's say, your application like a puzzle. You can switch on and switch off beans based in several different criteria. So it will make your life easier if you want to migrate things, you work with legacy code, you want to replace items during the development, you want to activate and disable features of your application, and that can be done with just annotations, which is quite impressive. So let's see the details about it. So in our agenda, there are some topics that I will cover here. So motivation, of course, conditional annotations family. There are several of them. At the end of the day, it's like the component. You have a component, and then under component, you have several annotations like service, repository, and so on. And the conditional, it's the same concept. You have a conditional, then you have a lot of different, let's say, sub annotations that you can use with different purpose. But at the end of the day, it will be, should I activate this bean or not? Okay, we'll see how this interacts with the scope. Scope, it's always there. It's one of the most important features of the Spring Boot, and it's the core. You cannot take decisions about beans without considering their scope. Okay, so we'll see how they interact with the scope, the annotation lazy that I already talked about, and profiles that I know that I should talk about it sooner. But you will see that if you understand how the conditionals work, I think you will understand better how profiles work in Spring Boot. Then I'll show you some examples, some use patterns that you can use, some use cases, with the most important ones that you can really put in practice and make a difference in your project. Okay, so let's see more about it. So Spring Boot auto configuration in a nutshell. This is one of the most important things, because every time you have a Spring Boot application, everything is related with the start. So what will be the beans that Spring Boot will find in your code, and how we'll configure them, which ones will be instantiated, which ones will not be instantiated. And after this video, you'll understand that some of the beans will not even be instantiated anytime. So let's see how it works. So first, there is a class path scanning, meaning that it goes through all the packages on your project and try to find class with annotated configuration or beans, of course, like components, service, REST controllers, and so on. Then it auto configures the models, and then if there are conditions, they work as a kind of a gatekeepers, deciding whether an auto configure any bean should be active. At the end of the day, even the beans that will not be enabled, never in your application, of course, Spring will collect them and registers them internally, but they will never provide you an instance unless the conditional is true. But you will see more details in a moment. So what are conditional beans? Conditional bean, or is a Spring Bean register, not instantiated, register only if one or more conditions evaluate to true at context refresh time. This is important to understand what is context refresh time. Context refresh time, it's, for instance, when the application starts, because it looks for all the beans, or you explicitly want to refresh all the application context, all the beans that are inside the application. Okay, so it's implemented via this annotation. There are a lot of different annotations, but all of them start with the conditional. So there is this annotation conditional, and then there are a lot of specialized ones that start with the conditional. Then you have the on and something, and you will see almost all of them, if not all of them. So decision is deterministic and compile safe, meaning that the beans are there, the code is there, but that doesn't mean the code will be used. It depends on the conditions, but it should be there because Spring should scan all of them to later take a decision about which ones it will choose or not. It's not at a compile time. Everything exists at a compile time, but on the runtime, you will decide when the application starts again or at context refresh time. But what is important is decision is deterministic and compile safe, handled before any constructor, because the bean will not be created if the condition is false. Declarative replacements, it's one of the things that you can use, but it's not. But it avoids the use. With this annotation, you avoid something like if environment contains a specific property with a specific value, then instantiate or not. But it will not be elegant, and it will be very difficult because they will not be beans. Or otherwise, you inject the bean, and then in the constructor you will do a condition to not set the bean or put a null bean or something. So you will avoid or choose a different bean, but it will be a code quite strange because you are. It's always a problem when in your methods you have to mix business and no business code. That's why Spring Boot uses a lot of annotations and there's mechanisms like spell, which is an expression language that I will talk in the future, and aspect-oriented programming. There are a lot of mechanisms that Spring contains that can avoid you to have, let's say, no requirement. Put in a different way, no business code in the middle of the code. The main idea of the Spring, you have code, and you look at the code, it's your business code. Then you have annotations and maybe another class, some helpers outside, but your business, it's business. And you should expect no more than 10% probably of Spring Boot code to support your code. Okay, that's one of the great things about Spring Boot. So why use them? What are the advantages of using the conditionals? Zero cost modularity, ship once, activate by property class path. Okay, you can create, let's say, virtual models in your application, because imagine that you have 10 beans and you have 5 beans that should be enabled if you are deploying in Azure, and other 5 beans if you are in the cloud, for instance, for AWS. And you don't have, you can create this kind of a virtual models because you just put conditions on the beans, and that's it. You don't have to modularize your application to have SDK for Azure and SDK for AWS. It doesn't mean that it was not a good idea. Maybe it was a good idea to have different SDKs and plug them when you are building. But imagine that your application can be deployed in both of them. The only thing that changes is when it starts, it will check some environment variables. Say, oh, I'm in Azure, so this is my behavior. Oh, I'm in AWS. Okay, it's different. There are some drivers that are different. Where the way that you use authentication, for instance, authorization is different, so it will be different. In that case, you don't want SDKs because you need all the code. But when it starts, sometimes you need half of the code in one place and the other half on another place. Okay, feature flags. You can understand now. If it's a condition, it's already saying, okay, if something is true or it's false, it should be available or not. The name says it all. Polyglot deployments, again, the example that I was giving it to you about the clouds, it reduces duplicate configuration across environments because each bean contains its own configuration and it's active or not. You don't have to duplicate the configuration, have a specific config file for Azure, a specific config file for AWS. I'm saying cloud, but you can apply, for instance, for operating systems and other kind of scenarios. Okay, combined with Spring profiles for even rich control is something that I didn't talk about yet, but I will. It's a different way. Let's say that conditionals you can apply to beans, profiles you can also apply to beans, but profiles is something more, let's say, like a slice. It's like you say, these beans, all of them belong to a dev environment or testing environment or quality environment or any other name that you can invent. You can create sets of beans with a specific purpose, and then you activate that profile. And that profile will collect all the beans from that profile. It's like you have virtual applications and you choose a subset of the or one of the virtual applications. Okay, but I will talk more about it later. So later, not in this video, in a different video. So the condition evaluation pipeline, it's just a sequence, what's happening. So you have the application, goes to the environment, it prepares the start and where are the conditions and so on. So we build the application under the condition context. He understands the condition, evaluates and say, okay, should I implement this condition or not? Should I activate this bean or not? And if there is a match, the condition is true or false. If it's true, okay, register the bean. Otherwise, don't register the bean. It is as simple as that. So this is the list of the most popular. I don't know if they are all of them or not. I think I didn't miss one, but it's if it exists, maybe it's for outlier cases. But these ones are the ones that you should know about. So we have the conditional that you can use, any custom condition. It's a very simple one. You can use all this condition with an expression. We have conditional property, meaning that you define a property in an environment, in a properties file, for instance, and you have a name, a key, and a value, and you just say, okay, this bin it's only allowed to be active when this value is, for instance, 7, or a boolean, or whatever you want. Okay, you can also have conditional on class or missing class. It is quite useful, the missing class or the missing bin, for legacy purpose, because the idea is that the conditional class, it means that it's only active if a specific class exists, and this one it's the other way around. This bin is only activated if a specific class doesn't exist. It seems strange, but it's probably the most powerful one here if you are migrating a legacy application. Maybe you have a version 1 or the current implementation, then you are developing a version 2, but it's not ready yet. But when it's ready, imagine that it implements the same interface, it's bin, and you put the bin there on your code, and the previous one it's already there, and you say, okay, conditional on missing class. So the old one only exists while the new one it's not deployed. After the new one exists, the first one will be ignored. That's very powerful, but I will talk in a moment about this use case. Then you have conditional bin. It's the same concept as the class. What I'm talking about is if you can use class or bins, but the concept is the same. Conditional expression, Spring Spell, it's quite powerful. It's almost a language inside language. And I'm not kidding. I will create a set of videos dedicated to spell, not just one, but a set of them. So you understand spell. It's everywhere. Sometimes you spell and you don't know when you're using Spring. But it's a very powerful language that can even work by itself. It doesn't need Spring to work, but Spring makes a great use of it. But let's say it's a kind of a language expressions that you can put on a bin. You can say you have conditions, you can call methods, functions, and things like that. But that's for another time. But meaning that you can have a conditional based on an expression, and this expression can call methods. It's crazy, but it's possible, which can bring problems, right? If you are calling methods that take a while, so again, the start of the Spring, and you are calling methods to just evaluate the conditions, maybe it can be, maybe it's not a good idea. But of course, it depends on the case, on the context, and so on. So you have also conditional on resource, again following the same logic, and conditional on web application or not web application. The name is already saying what it does, if is running on a web application or not, and some of the things you want to be run if you are in a context of a web, and sometimes you don't. Okay, relationships with scope, lazy, and profiles. So about the scope, let's say prototype, request, singleton, and so on, applies after condition phase. So the condition is the first thing, and maybe it's better to explain here. So you have a conditional annotation like this, and you have an expression there. It can be a lot of different things. You can even test if it's a specific operating system and things like that. If something exists on the file system, the folder exists, whatever you want. And you have this condition, so it matches the condition. Let's say no, so skip the bin. The bin will not be created. It is considered, it's registered, but it will never be used. Okay, but yes, the condition is true, so evaluate the profile. I didn't talk about yet the profile, but the bin should belong to the profile that it's active. So you create profiles and it should be active. Imagine that you are in development or in testing, you have some bins dedicated to that. So if it's active, okay. If it's not active, I don't care about the condition. If it doesn't belong to profile, just skip the bin, because it's not relevant for the execution. Yes, it belongs to the profile if you are using profile. By default, you are using a profile. It's a kind of a default profile, unless you start to add a real profile on your application using the annotation profile, but that will be for another video. So you have, yes, we evaluate the profile, it belongs to profile, so register bin, apply the scope, only at this time the scope is applied, or the lazy, and then instantiate the bin. This is bin, it's the latest thing. Okay, and then you finish. Okay, and that's what exists here. That's how the conditional is applied. It is the first thing that is evaluated. Okay. Example, let's say a property-based feature flag, how we can use, imagine that you have a property like this in your properties, or maybe application YAML. You can, I follow this approach with a property equals a value, but you can use YAML, and meaning that rather than writing payment.engine, you have payment, and under payment, like a tree, you have engine, and then the value. It's a different, some people like more using YAML because YAML is used, for instance, in Kubernetes in a lot of different configurations. And sometimes people in Spring Boot, they prefer this approach, but it's equal. There is no big advantage in one over the other. But let's see, conditional property, you will try to find the property like we did this time, for example, the properties or in memory, and it should contain this value. And if this is true, the beans inside this class will be considered. Otherwise, they will be ignored, as I explained it here. Okay. So how does it work? It reads the environment once. It means that if you change the property in runtime, after the application is initialized, the bean will not switch the state. It's not like now Spring Boot will load this bean, because it will be completely crazy. Imagine that Spring Boot contains a graph with dozens of beans with dependency between them. Imagine that 3 or 4 would change at runtime. You have to refresh everything. So if you want, you should refresh manually things. You should force the refresh. It's like your application restarts if it's a web application, because the beans can be completely different. It's not that you just plug in, plug out beans, because this bean can have a dependency of another bean, and so on and so on. Okay, even the scopes have an impact here, as you know. So the idea is just to scan for a conditional property, retrieve property from the environment. Property set, no. Okay, it's not set. If it's not set, match if missing value. Imagine you can use this or not. It's possible. If yes, register bean. Otherwise, skip bean. Yes, the property is set. So check value and check if it match or not. If it match, register bean. Otherwise, skip bean. There are 2 approaches, but at the end of the day, you have a property in memory and it should have a specific value. And if that's true, the bean will be instantiated. Or if you provide a default value, say, okay, it doesn't, but I have a way. When it's not there, consider that the value should be this one. And then you instantiate if that's true or not. Another one, which is to use the class path conditional, meaning that you have conditional on class, and you will try to find this class on your class path, meaning that you are using Redis in your application. That's why it's a good thing for you to make sure that you have always a clean application. Things that you don't need, remove them. It will help Spring Boot in this kind of case. Otherwise, you can have tricky bugs. So in this case, we have a Redis cache config with beans inside. You can see the beans. For instance, the cache manager is something that I should talk about in a set of videos about Spring, and it allows cache using annotations, and you can plug different cache engines. And in this case, you are trying to plug in Redis only if it exists. If Redis exists, you can see that is using this code Redis cache manager builder, okay, with this factor, and return this one as a cache manager. Of course, probably if you have another cache manager in another class, you should try to make sure that you don't collision on the beans. Otherwise, if you have 2 beans returning the same data type, you'll have an error about ambiguity, as you know. Okay, so be careful with that. Okay, another scenario, bean presence on conditional. In this case, we are using this, putting a conditional on the bean, not at the configuration class. So we have here, and you have conditional on bean data source class. This data source, it's not a class, it's a bean. It's in practice they work quite the same, but a class is just a class. It doesn't have to be a bean. Something that we have in our project. That a bean is something that exists and it's knowable by Spring Boot. In this case, it's data source. And if data source is there, meaning that we can inject it here on the parameter and you can give some information. In this case, we are doing, I already provided a video about that, about actuators and how to customize an actuator or create one. And this is one way. For the health, we are just, okay, if you have a data source, I want to check if it's valid or not. Data source is valid, I will display status up, otherwise it will be status down. Okay. You can also consider conditional on missing bean to let application code override autoconfig. But I will explain in a moment what is the missing bean again. So lifecycle and scope revisited here. So that you can see this as 3 phases regarding the conditional. The first is definition, meaning we have the annotation. So the conditional check executed, meaning with these expressions that we have here after which one of the conditions that we have. And if that's true, for the conditional beans, of course, they are always executed. Non-conditional beans, they are always registered. This is the beans that don't have the condition, of course. And everything will be applied to non-conditional beans. They will always be, okay, there is an exception, not in the scope of this video, which is a profile. If I put here profile, of course, even non-conditional beans, there are cases will not be registered because they don't belong to the profile. So instantiation, defer to first in if lazy. Otherwise, okay, they can be instantiated if that is true. And the scope rules, meaning if it's a singleton, the rules apply to singleton and the prototype and so on. Okay, they are honored after condition. The scope, it's the latest thing to be applied. And I think I put there in a chart. I don't remember this one. Okay, apply scope, as you can see here from our chart before. Apply scope and the lazy. It's the latest one before instantiated. Of course, it should be before the instantiated because you should know if you have to put in cache or not. If it's singleton, it goes to a cache. If it's a prototype, it will not go into a cache. Okay, testing and debugging, Spring Boot testing by test property source, and that exists. I didn't talk yet about testing, and these kind of conditions are really great for testing, as you know, for feature toggling, what is the environment where you are and things like that. I think you can really understand how useful it is. So condition evaluation report, I will talk more about this, but one of the things in other videos when we'll be talking about testing, but you have an actuator that's quite interesting, that's called conditions, where you can see which beans were matched or not. And this is quite useful because when you start to have all these annotations, at some point people start to lose, let's say, a mind map about everything that's happening. So you have to go to the actuators and check, okay, let me see which beans were really activated and which ones were ignored because of the conditions. Oh, now I understand why this bean, why I'm calling this bean, but it's giving me a different implementation than the one that I was expecting. Maybe it's a condition that it's not well defined. Okay. If you want to see these in the logs, you can always activate these on your properties and you'll see let's say what Spring Boot is doing about the conditions. So let's see some use cases. We saw a few examples. Now let's see some use cases. Let's say we have feature toggles, A/B experiments, meaning that we have a set of features in our application and we want to release new features simply by dark launching behind flags, meaning that we have flags. The users don't know, maybe they can understand that there are some new features, they are being tested, but we are not promoting. It's not that it's released yet, but we want to test it. It is also called A/B experiments, meaning that we have two ways of doing something or introducing something new, and we want to see if the users accept it or not. And this could be a good thing because you can always release new features by the dark launching behind flags. So these flags you will be using them using the conditional, and then you can compare alternative methods use with bucket testing. Bucket testing, it's a way for you, imagine that you have 10 features. Okay, just put an exaggerated number. It's not a good idea to put 10 features at the same time in testing, but let's say putting this. So you create 10 buckets. And every time one of the users reach one of the features that you want to test, you take that user and you put on that bucket. At the end, you have 10 buckets with users inside. And you look into the buckets and say, okay, these 3 buckets are filled with a lot of users. And of course, you only put the user there if it reaches your, let's say, acceptance criteria for your feature. And then you have these buckets and you can check which ones are better than the others, for instance. Okay. And you need to switch on or off without redeploying or breaking bean graph. That's what happens with the conditional. So use case 1, you can use a conditional bean solution with simple properties like feature, dashboard, beta, having value true, and you return a dashboard controller. Maybe you have 2 implementations for this, for the dashboard. One it's associated with this one, and the other one maybe it's false. Maybe you can switch using true or false, or maybe if you have more than one, maybe one it's 1, the other version 2, version 3, version 4, or option 1, option 2, option 3. I think you are starting to understand how to apply this. And then it's always the same content. You read the property. Okay, property exists. No, skip bean. Okay, be careful that if you put the conditional and the condition and it doesn't exist, it will be skipped, to be ignored. If the property exists, check the value true. If it is, okay, register. Otherwise, skip the bin. Then it's just the playing about all these switches. Another thing is for clouds, it's an example that I explained earlier. So same code base must apply to multiple clouds, which will have different configurations. It's the same application, that will be in production in both clouds. That's the concept. It's not you are choosing between one or the other. You have both, and the application can be executed on both of them. Maybe you have some legal restrictions and you should use Azure because there's an agreement with China and AWS doesn't have that agreement. So in some of the clouds they are distributed around the world, the application should be deployed in different clouds. And you have to create different beans because some of the APIs are different. Okay, and in that case you can have a specific configuration class with some configurations for the AWS and others for Azure. And here you can just create a property on your application. When it starts, it's called cloud provider, and this one is AWS, this one is Azure, and the return is completely different. Of course, probably this bean by itself, it doesn't have any big value on your application, but probably, and I'm almost sure of that if you have this scenario, probably have multiple beans associated with this conditional on property. Use case 3, modular starters. Imagine that you have an application using message queue using Rabbit, but you are migrating to Kafka because it's more modern. It's the same thing. You want a pluggable messaging. Sometimes you want Kafka, sometimes you want Rabbit. Do not require both clients on class path, and you want to choose a different transportation because the protocols are different. Here you can follow a different approach. You can say, okay, I will condition on class. If this class is in memory, I will. This is the bean that will be created. If the class in memory it's the Rabbit, it will be this one. This is not disjunct. If you have both will be in memory. It's not that because you are using this one will not be applied. That's not the thing. The both exists. Okay, it depends of your application. But maybe you are cleaning the application, and after you remove everything from Rabbit, okay, this bean is here just for history reasons, and maybe you can put something system log or something here, just to make sure how many times this bean was created, at least on the execution. If it's 0, it was never created. Now, okay, now my application is clean. It's a strategy that you can use. Okay, use case 4, gradual migration path. This is quite interesting. You have an application, you have migrated version 1 to version 2, and you are doing big changes, structure things, because you are in a legacy environment, and now you have a new implementation. And you want to flip traffic gradually with properties or profiles. I mean, you have a specific class, but you want to start to move to a different class. And you want to guarantee exactly one active bean. You don't want both beans to be there. You just, you have the bean 1, and you are introducing now the bean 2 at some point. So in this case, you can put something like, okay, first condition on property. If the version 2 is already good to go, you put version 2 here on the service order version. Okay, so you have the version 2 here. This means that this order service is at the top will only be instantiated with this order service v2 when this is true. But what is quite interesting is that what you're saying is that, okay, now this is the oldest one, the legacy one, and I say conditional missing bean. If when I reach this bean doesn't exist yet, it means that the version 2 was not instantiated, so keep with the version 1. That's quite interesting for when you are migrating code. Okay, you only instantiate this one, or else you want to instantiate this one while this one is not yet there. Okay, after you have a version of the version 2, this one will be start to be ignored because this will be false, meaning it's missing the order service. Nope, there is already an implementation of the order service. Okay, so I will not instantiate this one, and this one will be. Otherwise, you will have an ambiguity because you will have two beans implementing the same interface. So best practice and pitfalls: prefer conditional or missing bean to let users override. If you understand the concept, because you add this to the current code, and as soon as you have a new version, this will be the new one will override this one, because the missing bean starts to be true, so this will be ignored. So combine with profiles for even more clarity, and document every flag, expose sample. Of course, if put a comment on your property, say, okay, this is a feature flag and it means this, something will be activated, it's a dashboard or whatever. So runtime queries inside condition, you can, using spell and things like that, it's not a good idea. for so many reasons, and over nesting conditions keep config readable. So don't abuse at the end of the day on the conditions, because if you study the spell, you can see that you can do a lot on the expressions. So in summary, conditional beans provide powerful declarative feature toggles. Spring Boot offers a rich palette, conditional ones, as you saw. I show you maybe 3 or 4. There are more that you can research, but if you understood these, the other ones are just variations. Okay. Understand evaluation order to avoid surprise. It's scope and lazy. That workflow that I did about the conditional, then the profile, then the scope and lazy. It's quite important to understand. And expose actuator conditions for observability. If you are having issues and you are getting lost in all these conditions, activate this actuator and check what is returning. So next step, if you have an application, maybe you are using profiles, try replacing a profile block with a conditional property and measure the startup path. Okay, it will be quite easy, nice, fun to see it. Okay, further reading, this is maybe you already go there to the Spring Boot documentation. This is quite good, their documentation. And okay, thank you for watching. I hope you have learned about it. I will now do a code session, no more than 5 or 10 minutes, and I will show you at least one of these conditionals working in a quite interesting scenario. So what I did, I imagine that we develop an application, okay, and this application is the application that I've been using, and as you know, and for those who don't, I created an H2 database in memory that where with some, you can see my code on the GitHub, by the way, you can download it from there with these tables and some data. Okay, and I'm using this in memory, and Spring Boot can work quite great with this database H2 in memory, so I don't have to install any database on my machine. I can just develop a complete set of videos with the database, and H2 database is quite powerful. It is compatible in most of the features with SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, and things like that. So it's a quite nice database. But in this application, I have a users, and the entity users are just regular users. Entities, it's like entities like a supermarket, something like that. Main idea is at the end we have a kind of here of a financial application here, personal finance management. But for now, I'm explaining the beans. I only created the users entities, but soon I will introduce categories and transactions. And with only these 4 tables, I think we can start to have a minimal viable product for our own consumption and to understand the full application. Probably when I start to talk about Hibernate or JDBC client, maybe in JDBC client I will introduce another table, and when I start to talk Hibernate, I'll introduce the transactions, so we can text one-to-many, things like that, relations, and you start to have a completely full application. So this is the summary of this application. So let's return to the condition. So we have these REST controllers here. Where are they? REST controller. So we have this entities REST controller where you can get entities and get entity by ID. On the users, we have a full CRUD. We can get users. We have posts to create users, update with the put mapping, deletes, and other posts that we created in previous videos. Now imagine that we start the application, and the application create again these tables and fills with these users. But imagine that during the execution, things start to be messing when I'm showing this application, and I'm on a test environment. I just want to clear the database. But the database, it's in memory. Of course, the database provides a console that you can use even when the Spring Boot application is working. But I want something more customizable by me. So I want to control the users in an admin way, but I don't want to add these features to the application. So it's a kind of a feature toggle for testing for environments. And because of that, I created here on the properties, application properties, this flag, meaning that when I'm in testing, tests admin enable, it's false, meaning that, okay, I will have a bin, but that bin will be only available when this is true. So the bin, it's this test controller here. I create this REST controller, but I put this conditional on property, which is tests admin enable, which is the name on the properties file, and it should be true for this REST controller to exist. And this REST controller exposes 2 endpoints, which is test admin users reset and test admin entities reset. This is quite dangerous to be in production, so don't do it. Maybe a better approach than using conditional property will be put a kind of a feature toggle in the Git you are deploying, you don't include this code there, you just remove it or ignore this class or the class that are using this. At least this class shouldn't be there. That's a way more safe to do it. Having said that, since we are on the conditional property, so let's think that maybe it's a good idea to use a conditional property so we can, for educational purpose, to see the conditional property working. So we'll calling directly using repository. I'm not even using the service. That's why I put this comment here for educational purpose only. This is not a good practice. Good practice say that I should inject the user service and entity service here, and then they'll call the repository. But I just want to clean database. Why put a middleman here when it's not necessary? Okay, it's because it's not a production code. So we call the reset users, and the reset user just call the JDBC template and delete all the users, and the same for the, where is the guy here, for the entities. Okay, reset entities, and you can see delete entities. But I add something to make sure that I'm safe. Since this is a very sensible operation, I want to check on, okay, but only if it's enabled. If it's not enabled, the test admins here, and I will show in a moment what is this, say unsupported operation exception. Test admin operations are not enabled. And what I did here is just to create a second level of for my application to be safe. So you can, it's not, I don't know why it's false here. I don't want the false here. Okay, maybe it's okay. It's the IntelliJ, but this is what you write. Okay, this is what you should write. You can use this annotation. I didn't talk about it yet. It belongs to the spell that you can use when you put this annotation over a property, which should be a bin. You can execute a spell expression, and this spell expression with this dollar here, test admin enable. What it does here, it tries to find this property in memory or in the properties. And if you check it, it's the property that we are using here on our application properties, this one. And it is Boolean. And Spring Boot, it's clever enough to understand this is a Boolean using spell and set this value as false or true depending on this value here. So when this bin is created, this property will be injected, and here I can test it. Okay, which means that if by mistake, for instance, I forgot to remove the test class and someone discovers that, and maybe someone removed the conditional there, and now the REST controller is there. For instance, something like this. Where is our test REST controller? Imagine that someone say, okay, this doesn't apply anymore, and remove this line, but forgot to remove all this code, which means that I could reset things. But then I have a safety here with this test admin, and I did the same for the users repository. Okay, I injected here on the user repository at the start again. This, so this false appears here because IntelliJ is quite clever and it says, okay, in the properties you have false, so I put false here, the value. But this is what you should write. And again, here on the reset, of course, this is one way to use it. If you want a more safe way than this one, you can just extract this block of code and create a specific bin for this, a configuration, and you put there all the methods that you want as a feature toggle. So it should be easier for you to remove. Otherwise, you cannot remove this method even if you remove the REST controller. That's another way to do it if you want to go really professional on your code. Okay, so let's start this and see if this works or not. So let's start the application. It's false, so the REST controller shouldn't be in memory, but the application shouldn't have any problems with that. So the code is there, but the bin is not available. So let's execute this. Where is my, I have created these tests here, so I will call the delete for our test controller and tests admin users reset, let's say, or the entities. When I execute this, you can see that the status is not found. It said, okay, I couldn't find that REST controller. There's endpoint to execute, as expected, right? But the bin is there, it's registered, it's a REST controller, but this condition didn't initialize the bin, so it's not available in Spring for you to use. So now let's change to true. here on our properties. I will not wait for the refresh. I will just refresh myself. The execution. So let's start the application. Now the bean is there, and we can check by executing the delete of the users. And it's a 200 not found anymore, as you can see here. Okay, and if we go and call all the users, get users like this, they are empty. They will really remove it. That's one of the use for the conditional on property. It's a simple one, but it's quite powerful per se because you can use for feature toggling and things like that. But if you need more advanced content scenarios, use cases, in that case, you can also return to the other ones like the missing bean, missing class, and things like that. So this is what I want to show you about conditional. I think at this time we have a great set of tools about Spring Boot that we can use for our beans. So probably in my next videos, I don't know if it's the next one, maybe I switch to something, a different subject, maybe advanced on the database, on JVC with joins and more complex tables, so you understand better how to access repositories and start to advance to other things on Spring Boot. Spring Boot has a lot of different things like caching, spell. I remember others talk more about the REST APIs to change the format from JSON to XML, things like that. Scheduling, it's another one. There are a lot of things that I want to talk. Testing, Spring Cloud, which is quite interesting to create a kind of a microservice, and everything I will be doing in time. So I hope you continue with my videos. Please subscribe, share with our friends. That gives me motivation to write more videos, and thank you for watching.